Chapter 11. Jim Garfield. Jim Garfield followed a rigid sleep ritual. He would lay in bed for an hour thinking in a different way than he thought in the daytime. It was more reflection than thinking. At the end of an hour, he would get up and urinate, and then he would return to bed. He would fall asleep in minutes, and 2 hours later he would awaken. He would then lay in bed for an hour and think about things in yet another manner. 4 hours in bed, 2 hours sleeping. He had maintained this pattern since early adulthood. He slept a little more as a kid, but he had never been a big sleeper. But for 2 nights now, he had not slept. Things had to change. Waller County was a flub. Generals make mistakes. Oh, that was a hospital? Says on the map, it's a weapons depot. Why should criminals be held to a higher standard? The words of David Hunter Duncan spasmed in his head. America is the best country because America has the best criminals. The phrase was haunting. Jim Garfield had always tried to be a good criminal. Sure, he had made mistakes. He was human. And if there was a God in the sky, Jim Garfield would beg him for forgiveness. But Jim Garfield had never believed in God, and he swore he never would. The words of David Hunter Duncan pealed through his skull. The 4 commandments. 1. Thou shalt not stitch. 2. Thou shalt not hurt a child. 3. Thou shalt not tree hop. 4. Thou shalt not get caught. Jim Garfield had violated the criminal's 2nd commandment. This ugly fact tortured him for the customary period that he lay in bed. He slid into navy blue sweatpants and a black t-shirt. Silently, he coursed his way to the viewing room. Jim Garfield would have ordinarily set the multi-screen to news block, but he was tired of hearing about the 2 children that had been killed in Waller County. Why don't they talk about the other targets? When news people cover war, they love to focus on the collateral damage. Why not highlight the brilliance of the executed plan? Why are they so negative? The panorama was set to ambiance mode. Mountain stream, woodland, South Sea Island. Jim Garfield left it there. The salty fragrance was a bit overwhelming, as is sometimes the case when odorama is initially started. The motif was okay, but Jim Garfield thought that something was missing from his experience. He did not ordinarily drink booze or coffee or tea, and he did not smoke or take drugs. He was aware that people usually consumed something when they wanted to reflect, but he had never developed that crutch. Now he needed something. Jim Garfield retrieved a can of Pepsi from the refrigerator in the kitchen and carried it back to the V room. Reclining in the V chair, he sipped the sweetness. Joe Fungo. That creep was the reason why things went bad. He was the mastermind. He was the one who bragged about how easy it would be for him to take out a whole sheriff's department. They had used 4 operatives. They had recruited a hothead from Mary Elizabeth Jones's caseload named Michael Spivey, who was deemed too unpredictable to use for anything else. He completely bought the silly idea that Jim Garfield was a guy named Robert, who was a liaison contractor for the Mexican Alliance. Spivey would recruit the other 3 operatives. They would know what they did, but they wouldn't know who really supplied the cars and chemicals and sprayers and biosuits, and who really paid them for their efforts. The foursome could not lead the authorities to Jim Garfield even if they wanted to. Only Joe Fungo and Mary Elizabeth Jones could do that. Joe Fungo had led Jim Garfield astray. If one of Don Corleone's soldiers took out a couple of kids, the Godfather would send the soldier to his grave. Score settled. That's what had to be done. And that tactic would yield another benefit. With Fungo gone, only Jim Garfield and Mary Elizabeth Jones would know who was behind the Waller County fiasco. Jim Garfield had never liked Fungo anyway. He couldn't trust him. Fungo didn't think like a criminal. He was a terrorist. He always talked about wanting to kill people with all these weird methods. For what? A criminal, a real criminal, did not kill for sport. He killed for advantage. Criminals were soldiers. They killed for a reason. If there was no percentage in it, they would do something else. Fungo was creepy. Those rings under his eyes, his chalk white skin, his pock-marked face. He looked like one of those gothic assholes, but he wasn't being trendy. He just looked morbid without black clothes or makeup. A genuine spook. Jim Garfield had met Fungo through his cousin, Phil McDaniel. Phil McDaniel was a classic nerd chemist. He had been cooking drugs since he was 12. He could synthesize anything. He looked to Fungo for advice on things like packaging and large-scale production. Phil would not be able to do those things without the fungus. Let's hope the apprentice paid attention to his teacher, Jim Garfield said aloud as he swigged his Pepsi. Jim Garfield realized there was another problem. His cousin was dead set against making nerve gas or biological weapons. Jim Garfield had asked Fungo to feel his cousin out on this matter, and Phil's response was unequivocal. He would not create a biological weapon. Jim Garfield was unsure if he wanted to go down the biochemical road again, but would be nice to know that the option was still available. Jim Garfield focused on the rolling waves, the rhythm of the surf, the gentle, shifting breeze that was now less salty. Would it be possible to build his dreams without biochems? He closed his eyes briefly and then lifted up and finished his Pepsi. If biochems were as easy as Fungo said they were, then he would just find another weapons maker. Either way, the fungus was finished.